Welcome back, boxing fans. Thank you to another great day in the sport of boxing. I was just watching the full press conference today on DAZN between Devin Haney and Ryan Garcia. And it's ironic because people consistently still downplay and are discrediting DAZN, all to fanboy for the PBC. Yet right now, one of the hottest American fighters in the sport of boxing, Devin Haney, is part of DAZN. The face of boxing, Canelo Alvarez, is apparently going back to DAZN. Of course, when you have heavyweight fighters like Usyk and Fury, who are going to fight on DAZN under the guise of Saudi Arabia, AJ, Francis Ngannou, right? You're getting huge fan-friendly fights and a stable of exciting fighters. And I'm not here to deride the DAZN because I've been critical of DAZN. Last year, DAZN did not deliver to the extent that PBC did and the extent that ESPN did. PBC had a stellar year last year. And when they're having a stellar year, we praise them for it. When they signed Canelo Alvarez, we praise them for it. But at this point, with all of these boxers leaving the PBC, with the PBC not really having a solid platform to showcase its fighters, and a history of inactivity from their best fighters in the sport of boxing, which is one indication potentially of why some of the biggest names in the PBC lost last year. Primarily, you could attribute a lot of that to inactivity. Guys just not being at their best because they're just not being active, right? I'm watching this, and for some reason, people aren't friends of DAZN. But DAZN's the same group of people that offered the PBC the lifeline to come sign with them, which for you and me as boxing fans would have been the perfect scenario to have Matchroom, Golden Boy, and Al Heyman's PBC all under the same umbrella. How fantastic would that have been? And maybe potentially down the road, Top Rank as well, considering we're not sure how long they're going to be together with ESPN. And ESPN's long history of boxing has never really been as good as it should have. They've consistently done a shit job showing boxing, showing fights and missing the first fights and needed to watch the end of college football before the boxing starts, start on one channel for the prelims and then go to another part of ESPN for the main event. They just made it not easy to watch boxing on ESPN. And this is a historical thing going back to when I actually lived in North America. So this video is not to hate on the PBC. It just brings to question. We know Top Rank has a great stable of young up-and-coming fighters. Today, I'm watching this press conference between two young stars in the sport of boxing. Ryan Garcia and Devin Haney are stars in American boxing. That's just true. Whether you like one of them or like both of them or like neither of them, that is the truth, right? That's why this fight is getting all this push and why it is going to do very well. And why Saudis are trying to get Devin Haney to come fight in Saudi Arabia because they see his worth. Right? The question is, who is going to be carrying the PBC forward over the next 5 years? And this is a fair question to ask. This is not hate. This is just legitimate question about what can we expect from the PBC over the next 5 years? Say their agreement with Amazon works. And now we have Amazon as a player in boxing, showcasing boxing from around the world, even though I have Amazon in Taiwan. And for some reason, I can't watch boxing or English Premier League football in Taiwan. So even though it's a global app that people can use globally, and I use Amazon a lot, I do most of my shopping on Amazon, which makes my coworkers scratch their head. But it's far easier to shop on Amazon than to shop in Taiwan. At least I know what I'm getting. Um, but yet I can't get boxing or soccer, football. So it begs the question, what exactly are you going to get from your deal with Amazon? I hope for success. I'm not some person that was critical of the PBC and Fox. I thought them joining Fox was great and would potentially really help showcase a lot of their fighters and develop and build up a whole new crop of boxers for the PBC. Ultimately, that's not what happened. Showtime went out of business. I was not surprised. I said when HBO went under, don't be surprised if over the next few years, Showtime does the exact same thing because boxing is not what it once was. We cannot have fights every 2-3 months, right? That's why sports networks primarily focused on giving us sports 24 hours, 7 days a week are ultimately where we're going to go, which is why potentially DAZN is the perfect option for us as far as boxing content. And living outside of America, I know that DAZN can be watched worldwide. I thought it was funny today. I was listening to Fannin, and maybe you saw my video, and he brought up the point he's not going to pay for Canelo versus Munguia or Berlanga because he does not want to pay for a pay-per-view given to us by a UK promoter where you need to pay in the States for the fight, but UK fans don't need to pay. See, this is the kind of misinformation and fake news channels like him give you because it's the same fucking thing. When a big pay-per-view happens in the the UK, like Anthony Joshua versus whoever, in the States, you're not paying for it. It's not pay-per-view in America. It's free in America because they know their primary audience is the UK. So that's where the primary pay-per-view is. The same as American fighters fighting in the States. It doesn't matter what country the promoter comes from. Haney and Ryan Garcia is a pay-per-view fight, just like Tank Davis and Ryan Garcia was a pay-per-view fight. It doesn't matter that Al Heyman's a Black American and Eddie Hearn is a British white guy. The reality is they're both pay-per-views. Either you want to pay for them or you don't. And the likelihood of those fights being free in the UK, whether they're on Showtime or whether they're on DAZN, is the same. Showtime was not making people pay pay-per-view in the UK either. But of course, here's Fannin once again lying and putting out fake information because he knows the people that subscribe to his channel consider themselves this era's version of Malcolm X, right? These are the race warriors that push skin politics video after video to make money off of AdSense, right? We've been talking about this for years now. Nothing's changed. If anything, maybe it's only progressed and become worse. These are the same people that are so adamant about skin politics in boxing, yet they don't give a fuck about what goes on in their country. You don't see them making videos being upset about transgender people playing female sports or transgender education being taught to their kids in schools. They don't care. They don't talk about that because it's not specifically a Black problem. It's an American problem. And they only focus on things what they can identify specifically to themselves. If anybody else has the same issues as them, it's not their problem. We saw the same thing with COVID. People literally said, we don't care about COVID. It doesn't affect us. And then once it affected them, these same people then came out saying that COVID was racist and was put on to specifically attack Black American people. Even though you blatantly can go onto onto the internet and watch the people from around the world that were dying that weren't Black Americans from COVID. These same people weren't making videos about mask mandates or vaccine pushes in countries where people were being arrested because they weren't being vaccinated. No, they didn't care because it wasn't specifically a race politics type of topic that they could get into. They'd rather come on YouTube and make boxing about race, even though the same situation could be done in the NFL, specifically in the NBA and everywhere else. Because in America, there's many people living together of all races, nationalities, and religions. And because of that, some people are going to be negative towards others. That's just the way it is. You see this all the time. My good friend lives in Germany, and in Europe, the population of Turks and now Northern Africans, Syrians flooding into Europe is a big problem, just like Mexicans into America, right? Is this racist, or is this people that understand the threat this puts on their country, right? And it is a threat economically, and as well as other repercussions that come with mass immigration. But people don't talk about that because they think somehow they're saving the world by trying to promote an unknown black guy on YouTube that even other black Americans don't talk about and don't watch and are unaware of who he is, because he fights in a division that's too small and they don't care about anyone in that weight class. Right? But this is the kind of people we have to deal with. But the truth is, when you just look at the facts and the truth, it will show you everything you need to know. Let's jump over here for a second. So there we go. A sinking ship. Yes, that's the PBC. So let's open that so I can see it very well. So here, let's go through this sinking ship called the PBC. Right? I went through the roster of PBC fighters trying to see who is going to be carrying the PBC for the next 5 years. Right? Because you can do this with every platform and have answers and questions about people being old, gradually moving out of the game. Guys like obviously Lomachenko, guys like Bud Crawford, in their late 60s, late 30s, obviously not going to be around that much longer. So you have to look at where's the new crop of fighters coming from, right? So let's check it out and see how the PBC that's so pro-black and is the representation of Black Americans in boxing promotions, how they are building up and supporting Black Americans in the US, right? Because that's what people have told you. That's what these people have alluded to. Just like at one time they're talking about how PBC was great because it was giving us free boxing. Now every single boxing event they give us is pay-per-view. Don't pay for DAZN. It's too expensive, but spend $80 on a crappy pay-per-view like Tim Tszyu versus Keith Thurman. Who was ever asking for Tim Tszyu versus Keith Thurman? Frank Martin, good fighter, but is this a pay-per-view fight, him and Tank Davis? Is Frank Martin any better than Berlanga? I'm not pro Canelo Alvarez versus Berlanga. So if I'm not pro versus Tank Davis versus Frank Martin, am I a racist now? Considering both of these fighters are almost the same. Both good fighters that are older with potential, that are getting a world title fight, but probably prematurely because they haven't beat a top 10 opponent in their divisions yet. They haven't had a signature victory in their career yet. But yet they're getting into big pay-per-view fights as opponents. One is going to be vilified, while the other one is going to be glorified. But let's check it out. So here we go. This is the first crop of people we'll look at from the PBC. We know this fight is already organized for the IBF or WBA 140-pound title that Rolly Romero holds. The question is, why weren't people upset when Rolly Romero got a world title fight, coming off of a knockout loss to Tank Davis? Because some of these people are really upset Lomachenko's getting a world title fight, coming off of a controversial loss to Devin Haney, as if both of these things are identical. One dude was destroyed. The other guy arguably won and was robbed on the cards. One guy's still in his weight division where obviously sanctioning bodies feel he deserves that opportunity because they know how competitive that fight was. The other guy jumped up in weight and fought a nobody that nobody knew for a vacant title that was stripped off the champion who won a vacant title because he was caught on PEDs. Now Rolly is going to be fighting Isaac Cruz. This is really the Tank Davis sweepstakes, right? Two ex-Tank Davis opponents, one who went the distance, one who got destroyed, meeting up for this WBA or IBF world title. I think it's, WBA. We see Rolly right here, 15-1, 13 knockouts, got some power, but not many fucking fights under his belt. Controversially, he lost to the Dominican fighter he fought before. Arguably, he was getting beat by 41-year-old Ismael Barrasso, and the judges stole that fight away from Barrasso to give the title to Rolando Romero. Now he's going to be fighting Isaac Cruz. One guy's 28, one guy's 25. Cruz, obviously 25, 2-1. One of those losses coming to Tank Davis. One of those losses coming to God knows who. 17 KOs, so also a little bit of power. Both of these guys have moved up from 135 and currently are going to be fighting at 140. It's a good fight, right? Style-wise, this is you would think a can't-miss clash between two hard-punching fighters, and somebody inevitably you would expect is going to get flatlined and KO'd. Neither of these guys is going to be a star, even though they become a world champion. They're potentially going to be an opponent for somebody, whether that's Sabrio Matias, who obviously just left the PBC, Ryan Garcia, Tank Davis winner, who obviously is not with the PBC, or Tio, who is obviously not with the PBC. So I don't know if this means that Tank Davis potentially could move up to his third weight division to win his third world title, fighting an opponent he already beat at 135, but that potentially could be the play for the PBC because we've seen consistently this is what they do. Rehash fights that don't make sense against opponents that are fucking past their best or not even relevant. Both these guys are good fighters, but neither of these are the future of boxing. Rolly Romero dropped the ball when he didn't fight Ryan Garcia because that potentially could have made him a star. If he would have beat Ryan Garcia, then a potential fight with any of the other world champions would have been huge and a unification fight. But there we are. Let's move to the next group. Established stars in boxing. Tank Davis, obviously the face of boxing, 29 years of age. David Benavidez, the Mexican monster, 27. Both guys in their prime. Now is the time. Both undefeated. Obviously, Tank Davis, 29-0, 27 KOs. The monster, David Benavidez, 28-0 with 24 KOs. Tank Davis, a guy that we've wanted to fight the best names in boxing. Devin Haney, Lomachenko, Shakur Stevens, Teofimo Lopez. David Benavidez, a guy we wanted to face the best fighters in boxing. Canelo Alvarez, David Morrell, Better BF, Bivol, right? The question is, when are either one of those guys going to take on that level of opponent? They've both fought good opponents. I'm not going to be critical of the opponents they fought. David only did it last year in 2023. Prior to that, his resume was pretty much garbage. Gervonta Tank Davis has feasted mostly on fighters he's pulled up in weight or fighters he's pulled down in weight. He's fought good opponents, but as of yet has not faced a Black American fighter who was considered slick and skillful. David Benavidez, neither, right? Ironically enough, many fighters are criticized for not doing that. Lomachenko, Canelo Alvarez, Anui, but not these two fighters because they're on the PBC protection plan. It doesn't matter who they fight. David Benavidez was mandated to fight Yildirim. No one cared. He ducked a unification fight with Caleb Plant. Nobody cared. Last year, he ducked a fight with David Morrell. Nobody cared. Tank Davis consistently avoids and ducks the top fighters in boxing. Nobody cares. But they put that energy towards everybody else that's not a PBC fighter, as if the expectations should be different. No. If you're going to hold these fighters to all these criticisms, you should do the same for these two guys. David Benavidez has been a weight bully almost his whole career at 168 pounds. It's about time he moves up to 175. Yet he's moving up to fight a guy who had retired for 4 years and came back and beat two scrub opponents. And now David Benavidez is going to fight him. But that's a great opponent. Dave Benavidez fighting Vosdick is great. No one's going to be critical of him. Frank Martin being Tank Davis' opponent, great opponent. But yet Canelo fights Munguia or Berlanga, and all of a sudden, those are terrible fights. Yet those fights are no more worse than the fights these guys are taking, potentially better stylistically. But this is the fake news that people consistently push, right? All the fanboys, some fighters, some platforms, some networks, and then others. But let's move forward. So then we get the future, right? Neither one of these guys are American. Tank Davis and Benavidez, both American. Rolly Romero, American. Isaac Cruz, Mexican. Here you got an Australian and a Cuban. Both undefeated. Obviously, Tim Tszyu, great legacy, father, a Hall of Famer. 24-0, 17 KOs, has really done a great job staying active and beating all the fighters the PBC has put in front of him, and staying active even though the PBC does their best to try to make their fighters inactive. David Morrell, 26 years of age, 10-0, 9 KOs, my favorite fighter at 168 pounds. This dude is the beast. He is by and far, I think, the most complete, best fighter at 168 pounds. And I'm not surprised David Benavidez and Canelo Alvarez don't want anything to do with him, because I think he beats both of them. The point is, how come the PBC hasn't built him up more? He's the future. The kid's 26 years old, right? And I know he's Cuban, but he lives in America, lives in Minnesota. So this is the kind of guy you should be building up along with Tank Davis and David Benavidez for the future of your division, right? 135-pound world champion and 268-pound guys that one obviously going to 175. So then they shouldn't even have to get in each other's way for a while. But there's no push. Many of these pro PBC fighters, they don't care about Morrell. They're using Morrell only now to criticize Canelo. Yet they were okay that Benavidez blatantly ducked him all of 2023. And that the PBC hasn't pushed him more. Yet here we are. Tim Tszyu is fighting Keith Thurman in a fight nobody's really interested in. But if Keith Thurman fight leads towards Tim Tszyu and Bud Crawford, there people will see the madness in the, the method in the madness. People will be okay with it, because they'll say, okay, most people think that Bud Crawford would beat Tim Tszyu, but if Tim Tszyu goes in there and destroys Keith Thurman, it's a great statement victory. And then a fight between him and Crawford makes a ton of sense. A ton of sense. People also thought Zab Judah was going to beat Tim Tszyu's dad, and we saw how that unfolded. Didn't work out that way. Not to say that's going to happen with Bud Crawford, but Bud Crawford's going to be like 37 years of age probably by the time him and Tim Tszyu fight. Cobwebs are starting to form, even though Bud's a bad, bad man. So I would still favor him to beat Tim Tszyu to become a 4-weight world champion. Great for his legacy. And for Tim Tszyu to lose to Crawford, that's not the end of the world. You lose to a guy like him, hopefully you learn something from it, and then you move forward in a jam-packed division with a lot of potential great fights, right? And maybe the way Canelo grew after facing Floyd Mayweather, Tim Tszyu will grow after facing Canelo Alvarez. After Bud Crawford. And if he beats Bud, well, then never mind. Then we move to some guys who are in that middle ground. Two very good fighters. People were excited about both of them. They're both in their prime. Yet both of these two guys have been so inactive, haven't been built up, haven't been promoted, the same as Morrell. One, of course, is American, right? From Washington. Be more. And the other one, obviously, Lithuania. Eastern European, both exciting fighters. Stanionis, obviously 14-0 with 9 KOs. Already some good names on his resume. Gary Antoine Russell, 27, 17-0 with 17 KOs. How does a guy like him not get more marketing when he has a 100% KO ratio, right? How come he isn't getting the fight with Rolly Romero? You think that would be the launching pad for a guy like Russell. Throw him in with Rolly Romero. He knocks out Rolly Romero. Everybody will love it because people hate Rolly Romero. And this would be the launching pad for Gary Antoine Russell. And potentially, maybe you could do a Tank Davis, Gary Antoine Russell fight at 140 pounds for a world title, right? And by the time that happens, people will be behind Russell. He'd have victories over obviously Rolly Romero and potentially some other fighters at that division. But unfortunately, that's not what's happening. For Stanionis, unfortunately, luck has been against him. He had a fight set up with Virgil Ortiz, which was going to be a great fight. But unfortunately, Virgil had health issues and now moved to 154 pounds, leaving Stanionis in limbo. Who's he going to fight? Mario Barros? Boots Ennis, who's not a PBC fighter, right? You notice he's not on my list because he has not been signed by the PBC, even though he should have been, because that's a no-brainer. That is your future superstar, along with Tank Davis, Boots Ennis. There you go. 2 pound-for-pound quality fighters in your stable. Yet at this point, we don't know if Boots is going to sign with the PBC or not, which is why he's not in this presentation. Stanionis, I'd love to see him in with Boots. Or Mario Barros. That would be a great fight. If you want Devin Haney to step up and wait to take on someone, take on the winner of Stanionis, Mario Barros, right? That would be a far more established fighter. We know Barros just beat Ugis, but coming off of a knockout loss. So here, fight a young, prime, hard-punching fighter who's done it in the ring. If Barros beats Stanionis, then you throw him in with Haney. And at that point, Barros is a top-level opponent, probably just underneath of Lomachenko as far as the best opponents on Devin Haney's resume. For Russell, Rolly Romero should have been the fight. Don't ask me how that fell through. Then we get to the heavyweights, right? Every platform needs young, up-and-coming heavyweights. Here's 2 31-year-olds. That's very young for the heavyweight division. But both are Cuban. Both live in Miami. Who is the Deontay Wilder? Who's the potential superstar heavyweight that's going to represent the PBC? You notice that the majority of these fighters I've shown you, outside of Tank Davis and Antoine Russell, there's no Black Americans. But yet the PBC was marketed by many of these guys because of Al Heyman being a Black American, that this was the platform that was for and by Black Americans. Yet so far, I've shown you all these potential fighters that are going to carry the PBC, and there's only 2 Black American fighters. These 2 are both Black, but they're both Cuban. So they are not Black Americans. Neither of them even speak English. So what kind of star potential do they have? Frank Sanchez is a great fighter, right? The Cuban Flash, 24-0, 17 KOs. But stylistically, he's the kind of fighter nobody's going to volunteer to fight. Too slick, too dangerous. Ends up making boring fights because he's too defense first. Typical Cuban. Linier Pero is a bit the opposite. He's a little more wild and a little more aggressive. 10-0, 7 KOs. But at this point, he's basically a prospect, right? He hasn't even stepped up and done as much as David Morrell at this point. A lot of Cubans are represented on the PBC. And the one thing we know about Cubans is Cubans historically don't sell in America. For Morrell, that's a little different. He's very Americanized, unlike the majority of them. And because of that, I can see him being far more marketable in the future. But here you are, the future in PBC heavyweight boxers. Then we get to some young fighters to keep an eye on. Let's talk about Sam Goodman, Australian, 25 years of age, 17-0, 7 KOs. From what I hear, he's going to be in a big fight at 126 pounds coming soon. And that's going to give him his big opportunity for a big money fight. I think he's going to be fighting who? Why I can't remember. Is it Figueroa or Ray Vargas or somebody? But he's going to get his big American shot coming to the States. And there's potential. People talked about him potentially facing who? Anui? Am I imagining something? But I think it's being mentioned that potentially he may be Anui's future opponent, right? And considering he's from Australia and Anui is from Japan, that is the kind of fight that could easily be made. Obviously, they're both in that area of the world, so there's not a big transition from one country to the other. Obviously, a lot of Japanese people live in Australia, so that might be a fight where Anui actually travels abroad to go fight somebody outside of Japan, because Australia is not that much of a commute for Japanese fighters. As far as Elijah Garcia, 20 years of age, 16-0 with 13 KOs. He is probably the best young prospect in the PBC. He's good, middleweight, very good fighter. I mean, if you've watched Elijah Garcia, you know what I'm talking about. Very skilled. This kid is good. And as far as marketable to the Mexican American and Mexican population, okay, he's got that for him. Speaks English, speaks Spanish, obviously an exciting fighter, also very skilled, right? He's not so much a Mexican style fighter. He's more of an American style fighter. So, because of that, he is much more marketable, I think, towards both demographics. And he is one of the fighters I'm excited about for the future of the PBC. But in the middleweight division right now, I don't know what he's got going for him. If he fights and gets a guy like maybe Carlos Adames, maybe he can win a world title in 2024. He's still young, only 20, but you can see he's very advanced, and I don't think it's going to be that long before he's there potentially fighting for a world title, especially in the weak-ass division of 160 pounds, where your PBC opponents are either 40-year-old Erislandy Lara, Charlo, who's probably moving to 168, the other Charlo, who may move up from 154, and of course, Carlos Adames. So there are potentially some opponents. Charlo moving up and Carlos Adames, right? Those potentially could be great opponents for Elijah Garcia moving forward. But there you are. There's your one American young up-and-comer that's been mentioned so far in this huge stable of PBC fighters. And I've went through the whole stable, and these were the only fighters really that you could see potentially having a future. Let's move to the next one. Here we go. Really young up-and-comers. I mean, I know they're not as young as Elijah Garcia, but we have Jonas Telles, 23 years old, 154-pound fighter from Cuba, 7-0, 6 KOs. Exciting fighter. An exciting Cuban fighter with good power, obviously from the Cuban school. He is a good one, but obviously another Cuban fighter. Doesn't speak English, speaks Spanish. How marketable is he for the American audience, right? Hopefully him living in Texas and training in Texas and not Miami is going to maybe help him become more Americanized. I think they were smart putting David Morrell in Minnesota because there's not many Spanish speakers in Minnesota, so he had to learn to speak English. Texas, obviously, lots of Spanish speakers. Miami, obviously, lots of Spanish speakers. And then you get Luis Nunez, the twist, 24 years of age, 19-0 with 13 KOs, coming out of the Dominican, based in New York City, 126-pound fighter, super exciting guy. These two dudes got the style, right? Exciting, power. Both of these guys potentially could be very marketable. Problem is, could they be marketable in America? 126 is a division that people don't really follow that much because it's too small. And 154 is a great division. And obviously, being part of the PBC at 154, you would think that would open up a lot of doors for big potential fights moving forward. Obviously, both of these guys are young at 23, 24 years of age, but it shouldn't be that long before they are potentially top 10 opponents in the division and taking on the best and baddest in the division, especially Nunez, who I think, we may see bigger and better things in 2024. Teles, maybe not until 2025. But there you go. This is it. This is all she wrote, right? This is the PBC stable. Which of these guys are going to carry the PBC for the next 5 years moving forward? As I said, you got Tank Davis and David Benavidez. Maybe David Morrell. Maybe Gary Antoine Russell. Maybe Elijah Garcia. And maybe one of these Cuban fighters can transition and become fan-friendly to the American audience. Maybe. Whether it's one of the heavyweights or one of the smaller Cuban fighters, like Teles. But the point is, it begs the question, what can we expect the PBC to do in the future? I mean, at one point when they were with Showtime, people wanted to sign with them because big fights could be made. We saw, of course, Floyd Mayweather sign with them, Manny Pacquiao sign with them, Canelo Alvarez on multiple occasions signed with them, right? When you're a platform that makes big fights and has big money fights available, people will cross over and join you. But at this point, we still don't know what their deal is with Amazon, how that's going to work in the future, and if there's a future for PBC Amazon. Because at this point, we don't know what to expect. But leave your comments below. Let me know what you think about the PBC and the future. And are there any people that I overlooked? I don't think I overlooked anyone. As I said, if you go through the PBC roster, you'll notice a lot of old refugee has-been fighters that are irrelevant now. Guys that there's a reason they're not getting fight dates because nobody cares. Their days are done. And the fact they're still not considered retired and they're still listed as PBC fighters begs the question, what opponent are they being saved for? Because chances are, like Keith Thurman for Tim Tszyu, that's probably what most of those guys are going to be used for. But leave your comments below. Thanks for watching. Peace out. Enjoy your day. I need to go to Starbucks and start doing schoolwork. So wish me luck. Ciao.